Am I your first student?
You are. The first student is always the best and most prepared.
Hey, I really appreciated this selection of book. There is no way I'd have never read Willa Cather and was not on my radar screen. So this is cool.
You have to read My Antonia. That's the book most people fall desperately in love with. It's so good.
Yeah, that's what that show off Donovan Drake told me was the one he read. I said to him the other day, I said, I was very interesting when Sue Tully said it was episodic. And Donovan said, I said that. I said, oh, I thought Sue said that. No, I said that. No, you asked why, Donovan. Yeah, but I also said it was episodic. Okay, whatever.
Look at Guy in his, like, winter vest.
Hey, fleecy.
Hey, Guy, I had to go back to the January 18th newsletter to get the link. It didn't come out on the Wednesday blast. It had how to get the book, and it had how to see the first class, but it didn't have the link to the class right now. So
That's not good.
So I had to go back and get it, but I see other people are figuring it out. So maybe I just was not doing it right.
I'm glad to see you persevered. I'll see if people are texting me. They usually start texting me in panic around this time.
Welcome to my world, bud.
Boy, I bet. I hear the numbers of cases are ticking up at the old schoolhouse.
Yeah, Sue's in quarantine, so I'm in quarantine until Friday. It's the most ridiculous thing ever, and I haven't gotten your surprise for me, but I thank you for it. I can't go back until Monday.
Oh, bummer.
I know.
I should have had it just shipped to your house.
No, I'll
brought
be
it over.
there. I had a student come to class on Monday, and I sat like 30 feet away from him, and he was one of those students whose masks kept slipping under his nose the entire time. And then at 5:30 that day, he wrote to me and said, "Oh, I tested positive. So sorry." And please note that the numbers that we are reporting are not true numbers, because
from what I understand, the numbers that you are reporting are the ones that are coming through the campus health.
Correct.
Yeah, and not if somebody's doing that independently, right?
Correct. And we don't have a place for them to isolate.
Mm-hmm.
And so they either have to go home or get like a hotel room, and they can't afford that, and their parents don't want to do that. So most of them are not reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever.
Well, see here. Let me forward this to a couple of people who usually have trouble finding the links.
Look at Dana multitasking with the phone and the computer.
I'm trying to get other people on here.
Yeah, you are. Go, girl.
Okay.
Greg Crabtree's in the house. George is in the house. So I don't know if Donovan has a meeting tonight. We'll take a minute or two more.
Fine.
Sue, when does your daughter start at school?
August 1st. I'm so excited.
That is fabulous. Are you going to be able to, somehow, I think of lawyers when a child of a lawyer comes in, they, stand and give some kind of words at the bar. And I've known doctors who have put robes on their children and things like that. Or what is the appropriate academic acknowledgement that a parent does with a child?
Well, the good news is we have a class that our sophomores have to take with, it's called an interdisciplinary learning community, where they have to take 2 classes in different disciplines. And so we're going to get to teach together, which is the most hysterical thing ever.
Even my dog was rooting on the couch over here. That's when I went into quiet mode. Are you going to have folks read books where there's tortured relationships between mothers and daughters? Because
Oh my gosh, we totally should do that. We did a conference together right as COVID started. And it was the first time we'd ever done anything together, and it was so fun. And a lot of our interests overlap, so I think we can figure something out.
what was her PhD on?
She does gender studies and popular culture.
Ah,
And I do popular culture and folklore, so there's some overlap there that we'll be able to kind of do. She's in communications and I'm in English, so we'll get to teach class together, which is so funny.
that's outstanding. Well, the Mitchells are here, and Carolyn Harris is here. And Elizabeth Snyder is joining us again. And Beth, all the way from snowy North Carolina, is with us.
Yes, yes.
And I would hope that some other folks would come. Yes, Doug? You're muted, friend.
The challenge is finding the unmute button.
I found it. I would like to keep Sue in the center of my screen. Is there a way to do that rather than jump to each speaker?
You know what? There probably is.
We just don't know how to do it.
Okay. Our kids,
Upper right-hand corner view,
okay.
click speaker, not gallery.
Yep,
Oh,
I've got speaker, and then what it's going to be is everybody needs to put theirs on mute except for the speaker.
But
Look
my
at
question,
Deanna, the high-tech priestess.
mine, I still haven't solved my problem. I want Sue to be stuck in the middle of the screen so I can follow what she's doing better. I don't want to jump to the speaker. So do I go to gallery then? Maybe, no? Well, thank you.
If
It'll
we find
come.
if we find a spare 12-year-old, we'll see if we can solve your problem.
Elizabeth should know the answer. My students always tell me the answers.
No, I think
Need a teenager.
I think it's going to go to whoever is speaking. I don't think there's a way you can just get one person in the middle.
That is what usually happens.
And as I said, I think what needs to happen is everybody else needs to be on mute, and then Sue speaks.
There is a way to only see one person, and it's called pinning one person. And
That's right. I don't know how to do that.
I'm not. What kind of device are you on?
I'm on a laptop.
Okay, I don't do I use an iPad, so I don't know how laptops work, but you can pin one individual and they're always up.
Okay.
We're the worst.
Oh, there it is. Oh, I did it. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Now I will mute and be quiet.
You ready, Guy? You ready to get going?
Yeah, Sue, go ahead, and I'll go ahead and mute myself as well.
Well, I am so glad to see you all. I've been texting with Guy this week. I'm so sorry about the fire, and I hope it's something that ultimately sort of brings you all together and highlights the spirit that I know you have always had. Katie Rosenson was devastated and wanted me to mention how much she loves you. And I mean, we texted all night because her heart was broken, but I'm assuming we're going forward pretty well, Donovan, after the fire. Is that right?
Recording.
I am going forward, yes.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, we're thinking about you. So two things. Number one, I've spent a lot of time on this book this week, and I would like tonight to really work through the prologue, and then things sort of move faster, but it's such an essential part of the novel. The other thing is, as always, when I feel ill-equipped, one of the great things about being a professor is that you have really smart friends. And so I spent 2 days texting until 11 p.m. with my friend Pete Carilla about the presence of the Spaniards and Catholics and missionaries in this New Mexican territory. He is also Polish Catholic. So I thought, just think this over. I thought I might bring him in next week or the week after as a ringer, because he's delightful, but he also just has so much knowledge about the historical aspects of not just the area, but Catholicism. So one of the things I wrote to him was that, Pete, here's the thing. I can do this research, but it doesn't often make sense to me, like what the subtle differences are between a bishop, an archbishop, and a vicar. And he said, okay, in the Catholic Church, Christ is often referred to as the vicar of the real church. Do you know what that means?
No.
Look at Hank. No.
Head.
So vicar is considered the helper, the one who guides and fulfills the direction of those who are higher up. And I thought that is really cool, right? This idea of Christ being the helpmate of God and sort of fulfilling his direction on earth. So think about that. I don't know if you care one way or the other, but I thought about bringing Pete in the next week or two to sort of flesh out our conversation. You will adore him. But tonight, what I really like to do is push into the prologue, because while it is short, it is an essential part of setting up the major issues that the novel explores. Are you good with that?
Mhm.
So if you have your book, let's look at the prologue. So the title of the prologue is At Rome. And you have this group of cardinals who are making a decision about how they are going to move forward in this new territory in America. So I don't know how much you remember about the prologue, but are there any things that stand out to you in that prologue as important? Anybody?
They talked a lot about the Mexican, they were still under the aegis of Mexico. So they had to figure out how to, and they talked about the distance between the Mexico and Santa Fe and how that was a problem. But of course, it was still part of Mexico at this point.
Correct. So
Well,
go ahead.
I think another thing is, the request is coming from Baltimore. That's the sort of seat of Roman Catholicism in the United States. Was also thinking, when you were talking about your friend, of that book, remember The Black Robe, about which is more the mission work where the bishop is up in the Great Lakes region, and going from there down to the Southwest is just crazy.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
I think it's interesting too that you've got a Spaniard, an Italian, and a Frenchman,
and a
the
missionary.
Frenchman is described as being a Norman, and the Italian is a Venetian, and then the Spanish guy is half English. So all of the prejudices against the New World.
Beautiful.
And then there's the missionary, who seems to be, has been everywhere, it sounded like.
Y'all, you are so smart. Okay, absolutely. So on the one hand, when you think about this book as you're making your way through, it is so quiet, sort of, yes, in almost this Marilyn Robinson way, where there's not a lot of plot that's happening in terms of conflict and adventure. But she chooses to do this prologue that positions the text outside of the American territories. And this is going to be essential in terms of the major issues she's actually trying to examine. So the setting is, in the prologue, 1848. We're in the middle of the 19th century, which is an enormously fraught and problematic time in American history, where America is becoming increasingly expansionist. And we can come back to this later. And one of the things a lot of people don't learn in high school history is that a lot of this expansion is based on this idea of manifest destiny as it becomes actually articulated in the 19th century. What is manifest destiny? Can we come up with something that we can agree on? What is it?
Well, it just assumes that we are in fact going to be the ones that manage, and that everybody else needs managing, and we're going to be the ones that are going to be in charge.
And who is we?
Well, I think it was Americans and probably white.
Yes. Yeah,
Maybe
I'm sorry, I just didn't
maybe
hear.
both
Hank?
eyes.
So yeah, white Europeans, right?
Male.
This idea that there is this sanction by God who has picked America as this land of opportunity for Christians, and that there is this fundamental belief that we have a right to conquer and civilize all of America from one sea to another. And this is not a new idea. It starts with the Pilgrims 200 years earlier, but it becomes articulated and disseminated throughout America. And by the middle of the 19th century, you began to really see this Western expansion develop. At the same time, this development is also tied directly to the institution of American slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So much of Western expansion was tied directly to what territory can we have and where can we put these Black bodies. And you watch the way in which I love, Willa Cather talk about the indigenous people of the New Mexican territory in Santa Fe, where she is focusing. But the essential political and then religious problems remain the same. Does that make sense? So we are in 1848, the middle of the 19th century, and you have, as you all say, 3 cardinals and a missionary bishop from America. There are so many things going on in this prologue. So let's look at, this is the edition I have. I don't know what you guys have, but I'm on the second page or page 4 in my text, where these cardinals have gotten together for a dinner. And what is the dinner like? Can you remember?
Very elegant.
And lots
Yes.
of wine. Yeah.
Lots of wine, crystal settings, et cetera, et cetera. Fabulous centers overlooking Rome.
Yeah, lovely view from the terrace, rolling hills, wonderful wine, great food.
And see
So
St.
Ray, why do you think? What's the point of that emphasis, do you think?
Because think about what the subject matter is. It's so 180 degrees different than where they are. You're talking about this wild, untamed, they don't even call it America. They call it like La
New Spain
Mexica or New Mexico. And here they are sitting around eating this wonderful meal and drinking this great wine, talking about this place that's desolate and untamed, and they have no idea.
Good.
But,
Beautiful.
but,
Go
but,
ahead,
but,
Donovan. I'm sorry, go
but-
ahead and say it again.
I think she keeps talking about nature almost in a cathedral sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's like they're in the cathedral wherever they are, whether it's it's the environment that's the cathedral.
Good.
It's
Go ahead.
also about power. These are men who have a lot of power, and they're in a setting of power.
Or
Beautiful.
yes, although one is out of power in the way he once was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right,
Right.
that's interesting. That was interesting.
I was thinking about a little later in the book, and I know we want to focus right now in the prologue, but when the fella gives up his 2 mules,
Yeah,
he said, these guys are working harder than a local parish priest. They're supposed to be the bishop and the archbishop, and they're working, hard. So I don't feel badly about it. But you see the difference between sort of the two that way a little later on between the two groups. So,
yeah, wonderful. Anybody else? Okay, so we have these leaders of the Catholic Church, and they are having this dinner, and there's a real emphasis on the splendor of their surroundings, their privilege, so much on the plate and the crystal. But then, and here's where it's going to start to get uncomfortable. So I want maybe Donovan and Guy and some of you others to comment on this. So on my page 4, the paragraph begins, they were talking business. What does that mean?
In the business of the expansion of the church,
Okay.
they wanted to make sure that this new territory was part of the church and the
That's
church's jurisdiction.
That's right. Donovan, why did you get that look on your face?
We talk business all the time, right?
What does that mean? Who talks business? Look, Guy's waving.
Donovan,
I mean, the preservation of the institution, which may be different from the gospel, is the business of the church.
Absolutely. And you guys, this is huge in this book.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is the difference in, or the conflict between the preservation of the institution versus this thing we call the gospel. Go ahead.
Okay, my own perspective is that while there was very much the business concern of the cathedrals, one of the things that I think is important, and I believe Cather was very aware of this, is that because of the business of the church, and particularly of the Spanish part of the church, northern New Mexico had been essentially ignored for over 100 years.
Yes.
Theme that Cather will then carry through the entire book about the rise of a different kind of Catholicism from what Rome would want. And the real issue, because it's 1848, it is Spain's loss of power, of all things, to this American republic, but even more so on whether the church, which was under expectations had not been met on the continuing richness that would be coming from the Americas. The Spanish church in particular was under financial stress. And why commit resources to an area that's essentially desolate?
Yes, and in many ways, at least in the perception of Rome, it's barbaric, yes? And is it worth the investment? That was beautifully articulated. So at the beginning, within the first couple of paragraphs, one of the things that she inserts is exactly what we're talking about. This idea, so 2 things. One is this idea of the business of religion, what that means, how that impacts the development of the church, how it of the gospel, beautiful. And the other thing is this idea of America. What it is, what this American territory is, and how these different powers of Europe are going to insert themselves into this territory.
Divide it up if they can.
Yes. And, remember, before the middle of the 19th century until the end of the 19th century, Spain was a major, powerful investor in these territories. It's not until the Spanish-American War that their interest in America as a country sort of dissipates. What Europe understands, and I know this is like history lesson, but what Europe understands certainly by the middle of the 19th century is that this series of colonies, this space, is the richest space in raw materials globally. And how is that going to matter in terms of the investment, but also how is that going to matter in terms of how that might bump up against this idea of, I don't know, missionary work, evangelicalism? It's very problematic. And the fact that Cather begins the novel with this really well-written and pointed prologue is important. So they were talking business. The founding of an apostolic vicariate in New Mexico, a part of North America recently annexed to the United States. This new territory was vague to all of them, even to the missionary bishop. The Italian and French cardinals spoke of it as Le Mexique, and the Spanish host referred to it as New Spain. And then I love this. Their interest in the projected vicariate was tepid and had to be continually revived by the missionary, Father Ferrand, Irish by birth, French by ancestry, a man of wide wanderings and notable achievement in the New World, an Odysseus of the church. What?
I absolutely love that line.
Why, Guy?
Well, having started out as a new church developer, it's sort of going out to where you don't know and keep on journeying. It's a different place. I mean, his willingness to go out in these incredibly, challenging places to do the work of the gospel is amazing.
Yeah. And
I mean, he's not hanging out on the, back porch of overlooking the Vatican and sipping good wine. Although he does get a little wine every now and again.
yeah, doesn't really appreciate it though. Yeah, but Guy, I love that line too. And that whole sort of section where, as you pointed out earlier, she's very clear about making specific Italian, French, Irish, that we have this mixture of these European forces and ideas that seem to agree within this kind of overarching thing called Catholicism, going into this new territory that they only have ideas about. And so she is setting up all of these assumptions that I think are important and also problematic. That is, what they assume both about their own gospel and this edict to spread into new territory, but also their ideas about this, what this American culture is. But then she twice brings in these Greek mythological references. The Odysseus of the church. And then in a couple of more pages, they talk about the Aegean task that a new bishop would confront. Why do you think she's doing that? I think this matters.
What else does she have to compare it to?
Well, it's not her, it's the narrator saying that these cardinals are doing it.
Well, yeah, but that's their educational background.
Good.
So why wouldn't they use that as a comparison?
But it's fascinating to me that I agree with you 100%, Beth, that on the one hand, it kind of re-emphasizes their privilege, right?
Mhm.
But also, why are they using these pagan kinds of references within this Christian context?
Well, I can say that Donovan has referred to my office on more than one occasion as the Augean stables.
Interesting. Well, why do you think, why? Why is she doing this? Oh, come on, my Presbyterians.
Well, there's a whole lot of emphasis on building churches too.
Yes.
I gotta raise money to build my church. There needs to be a structure. There needs to be a point. But she's doing it. I really think it's all about power. It's all about the spreading of the power of the church.
Yes, but you could talk about the power of the church without bringing up a bunch of Greek mythology, couldn't you?
Well, hopefully.
I think the point about
here's what I'm going to tell John Bailey. No Baptist would ever be bringing up Odysseus when they're talking about a mission. That's just flat out true. So
these aren't Baptists.
Right. Yes. And so one of the things I at least want you to have working in your head is not only the education of these people and their privilege, but the ways in which their religion does intersect with other epistemologies. Whereas when they bring into the New World the building of the Catholic Church, are they willing to adopt to or embrace these other ideologies or epistemologies to impose order in this territory? In other words, you know, the Archbishop and his vicar figure out very quickly is, wow, the thing about this territory is it's filled with all these really different people who are isolated and have other religious traditions, but those are not the right ones.
This is one of the problems.
Correct. So one of the things I want you to keep in mind as you move forward in the text, number one is this idea of the business of church and what that actually means. And I don't know how much time y'all spend talking about that sort of thing. I know Guy has to, and I know Donovan has to. Is church a business, Donovan?
It's a sausage business at times, but we try to hide that from most of the people.
Beautiful. Yeah, y'all, that is right. Church is on some level a business, especially a successful church. Yes?
Well, I think, yes, and I agree about the business side of it. But I think one of the things that I appreciate about what Cather was doing in this prologue and with the cardinals there is that she probably was not thinking in terms that we may be thinking in terms of a unified Catholic Church, but rather she was displaying there the tremendous tensions that occurred, particularly at the time that she was writing, let's say, between the Spanish and the French. And the whole issue at that time on whether the Franciscans should in fact be allowed to continue their missionary work because they've done such a lousy job from the perspective of the business in Rome.
Beautiful. Absolutely right. And so even though she is doing this in a subtle way, she is sort of pointing to these tensions within the Catholic Church and the idea of the Christian church in general. And what impact does this idea of the business of church have on imposing order? Because note how many times in the very beginning, there's this emphasis on imposing order on this wild territory. So then she goes on to this. During the latter years of the reign of Gregory the 16th, had been the most influential man at the Vatican, but since the death of Gregory 2 years ago, he had retired to his country estate. He believed the reforms of the new pontiff impractical and dangerous, and had withdrawn from politics, confining his activities to work for the Society for the Propagation of Faith.
Which I thought was really interesting.
Why, Ray?
Well, look who he's working for.
What do you mean?
Well, if we're talking about developing the new world and spreading the faith, this would be the fellow you might want to talk to.
Good. And also note that in this prologue, first she sets up this conflict or tension. I love that word more. Thank you very much. This tension connected to the idea of the business of church, and then immediately goes into the tensions connected to the politics of church. And I absolutely do agree with Donovan in the sense that, okay, these are things that actually matter and occur on a daily basis, the business and politics of church, that we mostly don't like to look at head on, because they do create conflict with this essential idea of what a church should be doing in terms of its purpose on the planet. Yes? But she brings them both up within 2 paragraphs. But then you start getting this. They start talking about the territory and how the Cardinals don't really know anything about it. And then you have the missionary who's sort of trying to explain that it is isolated. And I'm on page 8 in my book. Some 30 Indian nations, Monsignor, each with its own customs and language, many of them fiercely hostile to each other. And the Mexicans, a naturally devout people, untaught and unshepherded, they cling to the faith of their fathers.
Yeah, so what does that mean?
Yeah, what does it mean?
It's not good American Catholicism? Or is it sort of a mix of Catholicism and pagan, or you got a little voodoo thrown in there? I mean.
But it can also be that these are, I mean, more plainly, what she's saying is these are people who, you know, at some point they were baptized, they consider themselves Catholics, they sort of practice the faith as they remember it, but they don't really have anybody, they don't have any priests or anybody
They don't have a
guiding.
rule book. They don't have a,
Yeah. But then
Right.
we've also got all these Indians. And so there is this sort of, melting pot of different traditions and rituals in an area that is harsh and isolated. But let's move forward and watch this. Your Eminence, it would be a great misfortune if a native priest were appointed. They have never done well in that field. Besides, this vicar is old. The new vicar must be a young man of strong constitution, full of zeal, and above all, intelligent. He will have to deal with savagery and ignorance, with dissolute priests and political intrigue. He must be a man to whom order is necessary, as dear as life. Now, what you begin to watch is the ways in which the idea of the colonies intersects with the imaginings of the Europeans. This is a savage country. And then you have twice brought up this, which I adore more than anything. My knowledge of your country is chiefly drawn from the romances of Fennimore Cooper.
I love it. Natty
Which I
Bumpo.
enjoy reading in English,
Do what, Ray?
which he enjoys reading in English.
Yes. Tell me why you all thought that was funny.
I just think Natty Bumpo is such a wonderful name.
The last of the Mohegans. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and Fennimore Cooper is not writing about the Southwest.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, but it is, for me, such a brilliant stroke on her part, because number one, she doesn't emphasize it once. She emphasizes it twice.
Right.
That when you have these people of power in the Catholic Church making decisions about the direction of this new territory, they are working from a position of what they imagine and what they don't know. And they invoke the name of Fennimore Cooper twice. And I at least want to address this as we move forward, because I think it's super important. In the American colonies in the late 1820s, 1830s, James Fennimore Cooper becomes the first international American writer. And what I mean by that is he's the first American writer who people in other countries are reading. And he wrote primarily romances about that are set in the American Northeast, a couple around the Great Lakes. And what this means, American romance, and why James Fennimore becomes a really important figure in American literature, is because he is credited with developing the first myth of what America is.
Yes.
And the romance of the Natty Bumppo stories is that together they become called the Leather Stocking Tales, talk about the settling of a savage country. Most of the early stereotypes of American Indians come from Fennimore Cooper. The idea of the American Indian as savage, but also maybe close to nature and having some nobility if they're, you know, Mohicans, if they're from the right tribe. At the same time, the main character, Natty Bumppo, was the child of Christian missionaries whose parents die, and he's adopted into the Indian nations, especially the Mohicans. And he becomes the prototype of, in American literature and the American consciousness, this thing we now call the American cowboy. He is the man of the frontier, the man of the wilderness. And the thing about Fennimore Cooper, which P.S. nobody reads unless they're in Sue Trout's class. It used to be required reading. Was it required reading when you guys were kids?
Yes.
Last Mohicans especially. Okay, nobody reads him
It
anymore.
wasn't required. I read it, but it wasn't required.
It was encouraged. It was encouraged.
Nobody reads him anymore. And of course, I adore him. But what he was really good at was drama, like the drama of an Indian scalping and the drama of, you know, skirmishes. But if you think about the impact he had in Europe in terms of what this vast unsettled nation was, it was huge, especially the picture of the American Indian. And so you have these men of religious power who repeat these ideas about America as a savage country and these barbarians. And they keep saying, well, the only thing I know about America is from Fennimore Cooper. And I want you to keep this in mind, because the thing about Fennimore Cooper, if you read him well, is that his novels are about nation building.
Mhm.
What it takes to civilize a nation. What is the price? And this is one of my essential questions for y'all. And especially in this book, in a religious context, what is the price of civilizing and encroaching upon a native people and territory? Did we have, go ahead, Beth, sorry.
There's a lot of loss because you lose what's good about their culture.
And
you lose the strengths of it.
Right?
There are strengths in it that are
And
not.
then you get into these really fundamental, difficult questions about, as Donovan said earlier, you know, this idea of the gospel and the, you know, what is the job of the church, the Christian church, in terms of spreading the message, spreading the word? In doing that, are we taking a position of always knowing better? Knowing what people want and knowing what people need. The thing about the Native Americans in the colonies, in what becomes America, is that they were enormously religious, not Christian. And does that justify going in and imposing order?
You're talking about Christianity being order?
Yes. The thing about Spain and the Catholic Church is, on some level, they did go in and impose order on the American West and especially the American Southwest. But at what cost? And what does this mean? Is that what she's sort of getting into? I just think the whole thing is so fascinating, and it's a part of our culture and history that we don't talk a lot about. We're in the middle of one of the most fractious culture wars that have been around since the 1960s. But so much of the culture war that's going on now is connected to race, as opposed, and slavery, and the legacy of that, as opposed to, let's go into a space where much more realistically, there is this systematic removal of this Native people in the name of the church. What does that mean? And I'm not passing judgment because, like you, I'm a Christian. I, unlike many of you, grew up in a very evangelical missionary tradition. But there are so many layers to this, yes?
Well, you know, you talk, what did the church, what did the natives gain from the church? In other words, were they different? Did they gain, I don't know, what,
Smallpox.
what did we give them other than you gotta move?
Jesus
Christ.
What they gained was, so as you see, as we get into the beginning of the text, you have got a territory of people who are suffering. Incredible poverty, starvation. And one of the things the power of the church had was to go into this territory and make things better in terms of whatever this thing called civilization is. We had things to offer, yes?
I hope
Just
so.
like we do now. When we go into more challenged portions of the world, because of our position, we have the ability to offer things like clean drinking water and buildings, etc. And then you go, okay, well, that sounds good. And the Spanish church, the Catholic Church, because of its organization, was also able to impose civil order in a way that we recognize it as European descendants, but also in terms of this thing that eventually becomes the rule of law. Good or bad?
Hey, Sue,
Yes.
Yeah,
two things in the prologue I thought were interesting. One, the quote there where they're talking about the new territory and they say that it's been taken, especially since it's been taken over by a progressive government, which I thought was interesting. And then also in the prologue, the story that is told about recovering the piece of artwork.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, oh yeah, we're going to go spread the word of God. But hey, listen, while you're down there, you think you could find this really valuable painting that, you know, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, Davidson's, do you have something to say about that?
Well, one of the things in picking up on what you're sharing about what the church has brought and the suggestion about the rule of law, just as a quick background on this, probably 8 years ago, I was part of a seminar looking at Willa Cather's work from the perspective of the Native Americans. And by and large, they do not like Willa Cather. They study it. It's a part of the tribal college curriculum in order to try and understand us Anglos. And what they are very, what I heard the native writers saying is, we all had our rule of law. What was given by the Spanish was expanding our trade on to an international scale. What's missing from the narrative is that at that particular time, the Pueblans were really under assault by the Comanches, which were the dominant Indians at the time that Cather was writing. And it was, as their understanding, if I understand them correctly, is it was their order of law versus against the Comanches. The Spanish notion of law at that particular point had become very weak. And so it was interesting on how Cather, around page 4 or 5, I think it is, where the missionary bishop is saying, we mustn't appoint a native. He's not referring to a Native American. He's
Right.
referring to a Hispanic. And those racial tensions are very overt in the Southwest. African Americans don't fit in at all. It's between the Anglos, the Hispanics, and the Native Americans. And then the separation between the Pueblans and their religion, particularly the Kiva religion, and the Navajos, which because of population tend to dominate. So I think one of the things that I am excited about in hearing your perspective, because I'm not an expert on literature at all, is what Cather thinks that she's setting here, because what the native writers pointed out, and most of them are teachers in community colleges, said that it really comes down to understanding the preposition of Cather's title. The title is Death Comes for the Archbishop. On the Westminster site at the moment, why it's Death Comes from the Archbishop. And I think, Guy, you may want to. And also Death Comes to the Archbishop. What the native teachers were saying, it's very interesting in their class that those who are Anglos have a tendency to see the title, whether it's literal or not, they see the title as Death Comes to the Archbishop. So death is somewhat like a disease. From the native perspective, it's very important for them that Cather used from, because for the Archbishop, because that is really understanding, as they would see it, the stalking character of death. And then the way that they are reading her descriptions of the territory then is, how does the Archbishop from time to time slip away from the stalker?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Everything you said is absolutely dead on. And I think two things I'll emphasize before we wrap up tonight, and that is, I love, and you're 100% right, about the ways in which Cather is read in different cultures. And the native cultures do not love Cather, which is fascinating in its own right. But I also want to underscore what you said about the ways in which the order imposed by the Europeans, and especially the Spanish and Spanish Church, is the ways in which they work to expand our trade on an international scale. Huge motivator. Again, bumping up against this idea of spreading the gospel. The other thing we don't often take into consideration, or that we forget historically, is that a lot of these natives and Hispanic cultures had very organized and sophisticated government, political, law systems long before the Europeans ever arrived in cultures like the Mayans and the Aztecs. And this idea that there is this need to colonize these people in a way in which they are useful to us or for us. And doing it in the name of God makes this question much more problematic and unsettling. I think
But
a really good place for us to start next time is
You
to
notice
push it.
though, you notice
Go
in the
ahead, Ray.
book, you notice in the book though, that that they're referring to, it's not, we're doing this to make good Christians or good Catholics. We're doing this to make good Americans.
Yes, and I want to talk about what does this mean, this idea of America and Americans. But I do think next time it would be great to start with pushing into this title, because you are absolutely right about the interesting way in which she titles the book Death Comes for the Archbishop. And in reading the novel, what you realize is the bishop lives a long life, yes?
Yes.
And the death that surrounds him underscores the suffering of all of the other people who die and what that means culturally to different kinds of and different groups of people. And I'll be honest with you, I when I talk about this book, I do mix it up sometimes and say death comes to the Archbishop, and then I have to correct myself. And so let's start with the title and then move forward in terms of the building of this church and the relationship between the Archbishop and the vicar. You guys are amazing and so smart and curious. I adore you in every way. So let's move forward. We'll go deeper into the novel next time. And I would apologize for spending all of this time on the prologue, but you know I'm not going to, because I think it's so important. A prologue is setting up the novel. So let's keep these issues and questions in mind. And thank you so much for all of your knowledge and participation. Yay, Christians, go have a great week. And
Thank
I will
you,
see
Sue.
you.
Hang in there.
Go Christians. All right, you
Thank you,
guys,
Sue.
love you. See
God
you next
bless.
week.
Book one
Thanks,
for
all.
next year.
Yes,
Sue, we should do book one next week.
yes, at least.
Okay.
Let me look. How far should we get next week? Okay. I would say at least through book. Let's get through book 1 and 2 for sure.
Okay.
All right, love to you.
Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.